Well, good morning. I'm Michael Maggio. I am the VP of Product Management and Strategy in the Application Development Group. We're actually part of underneath the mainframe umbrella, but surprisingly, as you guys probably know, application development is not relegated to the mainframe. It's across the entire enterprise. And so great opportunity to speak here in the DevOps theater to talk about really how you deal with the application development side of your entire process and how that ties into our DevOps initiatives. We're going to really talk about the concept of when I'm building an app and when I'm tying it in, how do I coordinate that process between I've gotten a new design spec or a new story from my product manager, I've got to do a change to the code, I want to control that change and see it go through the test and the build and the release cycle. And the reason that it's important to people that are actually building applications both on mainframe and distributed is as our world gets more complex, as you heard the presentations yesterday about the Internet of Things, more and more parts have to come together, which means more and more tools are involved in developing your product, which means more and more confusion can happen and more things can break. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. And I want to put it in context, because we hear the word DevOps, we all say we're focusing on DevOps methodology. What does it really mean? It's a word, like cloud, like all the wonderful buzzwords we have, and how is that tied together? And specifically, when we looked at the application development portfolio when I came on about a year ago to CA, we tried to figure out what is the challenge that our developers are having, our customers are having when they're trying to bring their applications to market. And one of the things we realized was that they are bringing very interesting and complex applications to market that effectively tie into the back-end system of record, which in the case of most of you is a mainframe or a big server farm. So let's think about that in the context of DevOps. Well, simply put, right, you know DevOps is that methodology concept of developing software, throwing it over the wall, and then hoping that the operations side can get that into the market as fast as possible. What's interesting is that it is really a response to the fact that you have to integrate all these massive solutions together, and so you could have a great tool for building, a great tool for release, a great tool for requirements, but if they're all not talking to each other, there's a real challenge in how the process can break down from step to step. Surprisingly, it's even more challenging in the mainframe world. Because in the mainframe world, you were very used to doing development in very staid methodological releases. I would do a release once every year, or year and a half, or maybe even 2 years. And in fact, we had a great DevOps tool, and you heard it mentioned in the keynote the other day from Amit, Endeavor. And Endeavor actually is an acronym for the Environment for Developers and Operations. So it actually had DevOps in its word. But what was great about the mainframe was everything stayed on the mainframe. And so you could tie all those processes from writing code to promoting that code and to releasing that code from one concept. That doesn't work anymore. Because what happens is now tied on a front-end process, which is called mobile development, web development. And so I now got to get my applications out on a daily basis. So you got this one wheel spinning very slow over here, and this other wheel spinning very, very fast. And you've got that combination of two coming together, and that's where the DevOps pain comes in. So what does it mean? What does it mean in the application development world when you think about the old days of mainframe to where we are today? And that's where we see the change. In the old world, application development was for one platform. That doesn't happen anymore. Application now is really leveraging those platforms to build new things. So in the mainframe world, instead of building, say, an automobile franchise application, which you saw on the floor here on the cars demo, all running with the teller or the loan officer sitting down in a green screen and saying, oh, hi, Joe, let's see if you qualify for that loan, going to the back end, the customer walks in with their iPhone and says, let me see what car's on the lot, what can I buy, and can I qualify all in front of me? That application is still being run on the back end, but it's now being attacked or written by on the front end instead of mobile devices. And so what's happened is that legacy and declining application development space in mainframe has turned into a new and growing and rapidly big challenging application development side in today's world. And so that new market, that we're addressing at CA in application development, is focusing on how customers utilize their system of record and tie that in to building mobile web-based apps. In fact, about a month ago, I was at the Gartner conference down in Florida, and most of the enterprise sessions were all about how does the Internet of Things tie into basically our systems of record? How do we get the two to talk? And the problem really is in the application development process there. So let's hear what they had to say.
We have two challenges with application development. First one is the mobile and web, where the data is needed right away, and there's no time to wait. It's not like the old days when you could generate a report and have it out the next day. And the other problem is that a lot of the people coming on are familiar with Java and things like that, but they've really not had any exposure to the mainframe. So people like me have to make sure that they know how to test on the mainframe, how to write programs that run on the mainframe. But the fact that people don't know the mainframe is a major problem.
So I picked Don on purpose. He's a great guy. Don has been a customer of ours for a very long time and used a lot of our older, I say legacy products. And as a quick joke, I do find it fascinating. Only in the software world does the word legacy mean something bad, right? Everything else, it's great. But in the software world, that means it's old. But the fact is that he's a prototypical customer of ours, which is he's been there forever building applications. Now the new generations come in and said, I need access to that. And they have no idea what they're asking for. They're saying, there's no way I'm going to let you go onto my Kix partition, deal with my mainframe. I understand you got to build a mobile app, but please don't touch this stuff. If it blows up, I'm in trouble. That's what happened in the evolution of sort of the world these days on how we move from old-day application development to today's application development. And from CA's point of view, we had to have that migration as well. We had products that were really good in what they did for the specific silo. So you heard Endeavor mentioned yesterday, it is basically one of the market leaders, if not the market leader in software change management on the mainframe. I think it owns over 80% of the market. We have a similar product on the distributed side called CA Harvest, which works really great, allows you to do from an enterprise-wide SCM tool, but competes with products in the open source world like Git and Subversion. On what we call our testing side, managing older applications, COBOL, PL1 on the mainframe, we do through our inter-test debuggers and analysis tools and our file master database analysis tools. But on the front end, we actually have a really interesting suite of products that we're now growing into the newer API management type of application development, primarily a product called Gen, which, if you guys have been around for a while, may have known it as Cool Gen or IEF about 20, 30 years ago. Surprisingly now, still a very powerful application development environment, allowing you to create a model of your business. What do you want to do? So it might be in the cars world, here's my inventory application. What I want to do is check my inventory, search my inventory, or update it. And I just specified my logic, and Gen went and generated the code for it, whether it was on a mainframe platform, a distributed platform, or a .NET environment. Great solution, still being used today by major corporations, major logistics companies. But it needs to start looking at the world a little bit differently. So I invite you to go see our demonstrations, and we're showing how Gen now goes into the app services world and takes that same model and generates application APIs and plugs right into the API gateway. But that being said, we're also trying to modernize all of our other solutions. So on the software change management side, we're combining the ability to look at assets both on the mainframe, distributed, and mobile side through one common software change management product. That product, CA Unified SCM, will be releasing it next year, and its goal is to really tie in software management for a developer, regardless of where that code might be. And it integrates with not just our products, but products like Git and Subversion as well. So if you're trying to figure out how to manage your assets and all your developers want to use Git, but they have no lifecycle management or no way of controlling it, come see Unified SCM. It has a way of putting an umbrella around all those products. We're taking our testing solutions and we're bringing them into a single package so that, as Don was speaking, a new developer can come sit on an Eclipse environment and see the testing applications from one single point of control, one server, one UI. And we're taking our development environments and actually making them, instead of generating code, as I mentioned, generate application services. And that's what our App Services Orchestrator does. But what I wanted to really get in today was, these are all lots of tools. And clearly there are tools on CA like release automation, service virtualization, service desk, PPM. It's out there. How do you tie all those tools together so I can actually develop across a multi-tier environment like this? So on Monday, we're very excited to announce the CA application Lifecycle Conductor, or we like to call ALC for short. We announced it, and it's available starting this past Monday, and it's already gotten great attention. You can see a demo of it. I'll show you one here, but see a much more in-depth demo of it in the mainframe section at the very end there through our demo stations. So managing the software development lifecycle, that's what we want to talk about for the rest of the day today. And everybody knows this lifecycle. It's not changed. The only difference is the wheel going from ideation or feedback to design, development, build, release, and then into the wild is just happening much faster. So this might have been a waterfall development process, which may have taken 12, 18, or 24 months to release. Now is usually done in a week or a day or sometimes hourly. And so what's happening here? We're taking our application development world and our application delivery world and bringing them together, and we're doing it through a series of tools in each of the individual stages. But as I said, this is the problem. The problem is that right now, they're all separate siloed stages. So I have a requirement as a product manager to go into the cars demo and add a new feature. to that demo in the load modification section. So I create that requirement in, say, Clarity or version 1, or whatever I'm using for my PPM tool, and I say, throw that story over the wall to the developer. And the developer comes in one day and says, got to do some work today, and I'll use that tool, and maybe I'll bring up Visual Studio, or I'll bring up Gen, and I'll build that, and I'll get to, when I get done, I'll do some testing. But, I'll let the other guys worry about the testing part or the build part later on. And then week goes by, even though it was supposed to be due 3 days ago, and the tester says, I just got a whole bunch of code. I just saw it got checked in. I better go test it. And the tester gives it eventually to the release guys. But as you can see, they're handing it manually off to each step. And nobody's talking to each other, and nobody knows what happened in the previous step. That's got to change. And that's what Application Lifecycle Conductor does. It allows us to integrate the assets from one tool to another and conduct the process across the entire lifecycle from the design all the way through to the release. So the idea would be that in this example I had, maybe inside my product management tool, I've actually had a new story on the backlog which says, go take this piece of code and add a new feature to the cars application where I can do load modification. Once that happens, I can actually automatically, through ALC, find out which code is affected, where should I check it out to, go notify the developer it's ready to go, and have the developer bring up their favorite IDE and start doing development. While the developer is doing development, as they check in code and actually say it's ready for release, ALC automatically says, okay, let's bring up a test environment, let's go do our build, let's run our tests, and if anything fails, go right back to the development environment inside that same console and say, here's where the problem is, let's go fix it. Of course, if it's fixed and everything's working fine, the build environment can hand it directly off to release automation saying, it's ready to go release it to test or go release it to prod, and then once it's out in the field, ALC can keep track of what's going on in the field through APM or UIM, saying how is this product running, how are the systems running underneath that. Let's put that all together and tie it to a common asset and to tie it to a service desk request. So now when somebody calls in with a problem, my service desk person knows exactly who wrote the code, what requirement was tied to, when was the build done, how well did the test run, what was the day of the release, what was in the release automation package, and where did it go out in the field, all from one single point of control. And that's the idea of how to break down the DevOps challenge. If I can have all the different components talking to each other and seeing a collaboration amongst all the team members, I can actually get the problem solved a lot faster. So, as I promised, we'll actually show you a little bit of that from a demo point of view. So, again, here's our life cycle. And one of the challenges of showing ALC is that so much happens behind the scenes that it's really hard for you guys to visualize what's going on and what magic is occurring. So I tried to break it down to a couple steps, but as we go through the process, remember a lot of this is actually happening behind the scenes, but we've actually exposed it here to you guys to see what's going on, the step process. So I'm going to skip the first step of actually going and creating that requirement, but ALC ties into various set of tools. So let's say you're creating that requirement in Clarity or version 1, and you as a product manager created a new story in your Epic saying, I need to change the load modification of the cars app. In ALC, you would actually bring up a task board, drag that task on, and say, I'm going to go ahead and create that new story. I'm going to assign it to these developers. They're going to go do the work. As soon as that's assigned, ALC then goes and connects the right components through either the software change management product. In this case, we're going to use Harvest, or the build environment, or the development environment. In this case, we're going to use Microsoft Visual Studio as where I'm going to make the change and actually take those changes and tests and throw them into a test management system that's going to be generated automatically as well. And in this case, I think we're using HP Quality Center, but you could kick off a service virtualization and run a test there as well. So here we go. Developers just came down and they said, I've got to make a change to the cars app. Well, if you've been here for the last couple of days, you're probably familiar with the application. In this case, I'm looking at the loan application section. I'm not going to change that in this demo because it's too complex. I'm going to actually change the inventory search section. I'm going to make a very minor visual change so you can see what's going on. But the developer's looking at this saying, I understand the application, lots of different components. It's going to call to the back end. I've got to make some changes. So let me bring up my Visual Studio environment. Well, here's the Visual Studio, but what you see here on the left is actually the plugin from ALC. This is the Application Lifecycle Conductor window running inside of Visual Studio, and he can see his task or her tasks, and those tasks say, I've got a new story assigned to me, and that story is to add a loan suggestion feature. Now, that came from Clarity, or that came from version 1, that came from my PPM tool automatically, so I can now go and figure out what I need to do with that as a developer. So still staying inside of my environment, I can bring up Harvest, which is my software change management product, and see what code packages were assigned to this requirement. The code package is just a grouping of code that implements a specific feature. That again is a utility, or that is an artifact of the underlying tool, in this case Harvest. And so all these underlying artifacts can be passed through into ALC, and they can be understood as to what they do, regardless of what you're using. In this case, it's required for me to actually set context, which means what set of files am I going to work on. So again, within Visual Studio, you see the Harvest plugin now checking out the code that's required to change this one aspect of the website. Again, a lot of stuff's happening behind the scenes, so but to understand the realization, you're seeing, if you can visualize in your mind, AOC talking to two different tools right now. It's talking to USCM, and it's talking to the requirements management tool, and it's talking to Visual Studio, actually 3 tools, saying, let's bring all this together so I can go ahead and add that loan feature. And everything that the developer's doing is being captured as an asset inside that lifecycle process. So later on, if the manager or the help desk wants to go see what happened, they can actually see all the steps in the traceability matrix as to what happened when I checked in this code and when I made the change. So I'm going to go make the change in the code, and I'm going to do something really simple. I'm going to just change a word from, I forgot what it was actually, inventory search to search inventory. So that way we can see the new release product and the change that happened inside of the product. So I'm going to go ahead and use Harvest, check out the files, set the right context, and then go in and make the edit. I'll go look at the original page. Here's my test page. Yes, it changed to search inventory when I actually did that. Let me go back to the original page, and it says inventory search. I understand where I am and where I'm going to as a developer, and I'm ready to go ahead and check in all of my changes. So again, what's happening here is I haven't left Visual Studio. These are all plugins inside of that. Here's an ALC plugin that's saying, let me go see what I'm going to do. I'm going to check in code, and I can see in the bottom of the screen, here are the 3 pieces of code that are going to be checked in. So ALC has now gone out to Harvest and said, go check these code in, grab that information, pull it back into our repository, make sure we keep track of what assets are happening there, so I can go back into the traceability matrix and see what happened. Now I'm looking at ALC again now and saying, here is the changes that Harvest did for me. Again, if I'm in the release cycle and I want to go back and look at this, I can see this connected as well. Said a lot happens, and it's really kind of fun. So I go inside my SCM product and say, when we look at the connectors here, and this is actually the connection, again, between ALC and in this case, Harvest. And I want to make sure that all the fields are correct, everything looks wonderful, and I'm ready to go ahead and commit my changes. So I'm set. I've got the change done. I've done the code as a developer. I could go home. But I forgot to call the guys in build and release to go get the thing built and released. Now, that's not a problem again, because ALC already knows I'm done. So what is it doing? So now a lot of magic is going to happen. What happens at this point now is once I've actually got ready to check my code in for changes and I've approved it and moved it down the task to release, the system, in this case ALC, is automatically going to go make a build by going over to Meister from OpenMake and do the build. Take that build result, and if it passes, send all those assets over to RA and say to release automation, I'm ready to go do your release. And RA is going to go ahead and do its release, and when it's all done, it's going to send feedback into ALC saying, I'm all done, here's what the release is, and as a developer, I can go see what happened. All basically by just checking in my code and saying I'm done. So everything you see here actually happens automatically. You don't actually see it, but we're going to show you what's going on. Bringing those 3 tools together, I've made my change, I'm ready to go ahead and orchestrate or conduct that process from checking my code as a developer all the way to I've now got a product that's released into test for me to look at. So again, I'm in ALC, I've gone to my component, I'm going to change my status from in development to actually completed. You may see when this pops up occasionally the task board for ALC, and the task board will actually see this task move from in development to the far right in green saying released and ready to go. And as soon as I hit yes, a lot of stuff is happening. At that yes, I say, are you sure that you want to check this stuff in? I do, okay, because I'm going to kick off those processes, and now all the work starts happening. It will automatically go to the Harvest software change management product and check code out, etc. What we did here to sort of break the video up a little bit, it was asking to actually allow the developer to log into Harvest just so we could pause the script for a second and show you where it is. But I can actually check my traceability matrix and see where things are, and I'll actually see that the code got moved from in development into test inside of Harvest. That wasn't anything I had to do. ALC did it for me by telling Harvest to move the thing to the next stage of the lifecycle. Once it did that, it actually said to go to OpenMake and go do a build, and that's where it should pop up and say, all right, do you want OpenMake to go grab the files out of Harvest? And again, in the real world, you wouldn't have had to log in. You would have just said, pass my credentials across and do it for me automatically. We're looking at the specific ALC record that tells you what to do when it's actually gone and done the check-in. I can also go down and look at the different operations that may have occurred. I'm actually now looking at a view inside of Meister and says, here's the build that occurred. So again, with an ALC, I can pull any of the other tools that are underneath it and look at the output matrix and what they actually output. In this case, Meister actually went in and did the build and said everything was fine, and continued on to the next step. And usually when we're playing recordings, we can't really speed up the computer very fast, and the person that's watching the demo or building the demo is saying, how will this work for you, Michael? I'll say, it'll work fine, until I get on stage and start pacing. But we've now gone and we've done the actual build. We can now go look at what happened, and it got passed over to RA. So RA has actually taken that information and populated the traceability matrix again in Application Lifecycle Conductor, and I can actually expand and see the release automation job, and here's all the steps of the job that were going to go ahead and happen once the build was complete. So again, from one window, from one control point, I didn't have to worry about checking stuff out in the SCM tool. It did it for me automatically. I didn't have to worry about when the test actually passed to give it to RA. It did that for me automatically. And RA said, okay, now I'm ready to go ahead and do my deployment. Here's the things I need to do. Can I go get them from you? And it goes and does the deployment. So I'm all done. Let's go see if it worked. And there's the original page that says inventory search. And now let's see what happens when I refresh it. And if the deployment worked correctly, it should say search inventory, and lo and behold, it actually did the deployment correctly. So again, a lot happened when I just said, check the code in, I'm ready to go. All happened behind the scenes, brought it all together. I want to show you one more interesting piece of that, because these arrows actually are bidirectional. So let's say that I don't have ALC as a release engineer. All I have is RA. Well, that's okay, because RA also knows about ALC. And so if I'm using release automation and I decide I'm going to define my release inside of the release component itself in the workshop, I can actually lay the whole thing out, create my commands here, and as I'm doing that, that information and through the connector between ALC and RA, I can actually make sure that all the assets information is passed back and forth. So here you're seeing the plugin commands inside the action pack from RA to ALC. And here within RA, you can actually create an ALM item, for example, an asset you're going to track. You can execute a workflow inside of the Application Lifecycle Conductor from within inside of RA. You can do get latest information, say get the latest build from your build environment. These are all the activities that are available in the action pack of RA that plug back into ALC. So like I said, these two products are intimately tied together and can actually work really nicely hand in hand, regardless of which endpoint you're actually plugging into. So if I'm going to execute an ALM workflow from inside of RA, that workflow that I'm calling in ALC, in this case it's ALM, previous name of the product, it will actually take that workflow, those workflow assets, and bring it back into the traceability matrix. So when I'm all done with this run, I'll actually see two different releases, the one that I ran from inside of ALC and the release I ran inside of RA that went back and provided feedback to the system. So let's look at that. We're going to go ahead inside of the Operations Center of RA and create that release process. I create that release process, and you guys are, if you're familiar with RA, pretty straightforward of what are the actions I'm going to do to pull stuff together as part of the release. Now, this is different from the workflow of ALC, because remember, the workflow of ALC is telling me how am I going to build the application? Where's the requirements? How is it tied to the set of code? What developers are working on it? Where's the build process, et cetera, for building the application? But if you're your job is only to worry about the release, you have a similar workflow. I want to go get the code from the build environment, get the code from the developer doing that, get the results of that stuff and pull it together so I can do a release. So the two of them fit very nicely together. Of course, something goes wrong when I'm developing the application, ALC will allow me to go back and forth in that workflow. If something goes wrong while I'm doing a release, I can go back through the release process and go back to ALC and find out where it happened. And if it happened in the development or the design code, I can go back to those tools and use that. And I've tied all those pieces together from one common point of view. So I'm ready to go. I've put together my control flow, my build script for doing a release. I'm just going to set up the final parameters to add which servers to talk to, et cetera. And again, this is all within RA, so right now ALC is behind the scenes grabbing this information. And I want to point again, this is tied together. So I'm going to go ahead into the Operations Center. I'm going to go ahead and say, here's the release I want to go. Let's go click and run it. There's the run button. And when I hit the run, again, everything that's happening through RA is being captured by ALC as well. And we'll see the same result, not surprising, we'll see the same traceability inside of the application lifecycle conductor traceability matrix, only we drove everything in this case from outside of the product inside of RA. So here's the run, it's just about done. Once it's done, I can actually go back and see what happened inside of ALC. So I'm going to actually do that by bringing up my Harvest product, because that has a view of ALC, especially going directly to ALC. And inside of Harvest, on the left-hand side again, we're looking at the ALC product embedded inside of Harvest. I'm going to look at remote records for release automation, and you'll see the second job ran, just like the first job ran. And when I expand that second job, all the same information that was in the first job being run from ALC will show up again inside ALC, but this time was run from RA. So again, a two-way communication, two-way connection, and this is true for all tools. And so if you're using, again, something like Clarity, and you want to set all the requirements in and all your users in there, that information is captured by ALC. So if you now go into the development stage, you'll see those Clarity requirements inside of your development environment being brought together by the connector inside of ALC. So regardless of what tool you want to use, if there's a connector into Application Lifecycle Conductor, the user can use the tool they're familiar with, or they can use it from the common console inside of ALC. And again, that's the idea that breaks down that brick wall in the previous slide, so that I no longer have to worry about the communication from left to right. It's all tied in together. And that's really the concept behind how we solve the collaboration challenge inside of the DevOps methodology for building applications. And there are lots of great integrations. Like I said, Service Desk, you can see some of those going on as well in the demo station. But sort of in closing, what I want to talk about is really how we've looked at, say, a year ago, disparate components of application development. We had great products in that space. There are partners and competitors and open source products in that space. But what it really needs to do is we need to tie all those tools together so there's a collaboration and communication through all the process of the application lifecycle. Inside of the AppDev portfolio within CA, we have products that we've had for years that we've revamped or enhanced and enhanced so that they plug in as building blocks into this process. So in our testing area for mainframe, we have InterTest and FileMaster. In our software change management sections, we have Endeavor and Harvest. And in our modernization or application development space, we have Gen and we have Plex. But what we're doing what we've done over the past year, and we're launching at World, and we've been showing to people, is the new technology that's coming out from CA. Primarily around application lifecycle management with the ALC product, the ability to take applications and turn them into app services that populate the API gateway through the app services orchestrator, and coming soon the ability to connect all of your assets from soup to nuts in the unified software change management product. So that was a lot in 30 minutes. Thanks. There are still things going on today on the show floor that are related, obviously. Love to see you guys come see them. I'll actually got about 2 minutes if there's any questions, or I can take questions afterwards. But I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming.